Welcome to another session in the Family Matters strand. And thank you to the Parents Forum also for sponsoring it. This session is called The Crisis of Childcare, Who's Holding the Baby? Lots of great issues to discuss. And my panel to help us through that is Anne Fennell to my left. She's the chair of the Mothers at Home Matters, president of European Federation of Parents and Carers. To my right is Naomi Fisch, who's a journalist and commentator, co-author of The Parisian's Guide to Cafes, Bars and Restaurants. And my last panellist is Emma Gilland, and she is a politics student at the University of Birmingham and co-author of the Corona Generation, Coming of Age in a Crisis. She also is the editor of Red Brick. So we're going to start with Anne. They're going to speak for about 4 to 5 minutes, and then we'll go straight out for comments, thoughts, ideas from the floor. Thank you, Anne.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me, and it's great to be part of this discussion. Having a baby is a life-changing experience. For me, it quite literally took my breath away. Suddenly, from being relatively independent, you've given birth to a human being that is totally dependent, initially on you. It has to be cut from you and relies on you for survival. Biology is very strong, particularly for a mother. Unconsciously and unwittingly, at least, half your emotional time is spent thinking about this new being. And even when you're not with them, your thoughts are with them. It can be an incredibly challenging time, challenging in terms of identity and your place in the world. Can you go back to your old way of life, your old identity? You have a new role, a new responsibility. And how does that fit in with your old world? How do I see myself? But more importantly, really, it's not really important, but the thoughts are, how do others see me? And it's challenging physically. No one prepares you for the demands of a newborn. And many of the structures that supported mothers are broken down. We don't have that help. But it can also be a deeply enriching experience. There's a birth of a new life, not only in the baby, but within oneself. Babies bring the magic back into your world. They bring delight, unconditional love. For me, I found greater meaning in life, empathy, a lot of humility, and joy. When a baby gazes into your eyes, and it's that purity of unconditional love, and it smiles at you, your heart literally melts. There are probably very few mothers who will not experience some kind of inner conflict when it comes to the decision of whether to care oneself or to go back to paid work. And we're constantly having to juggle competing priorities, which involve paying the bills, the needs of particular children, and children are very different. I've had 6, and each one has been very different. One baby will be very needy, another very easy. And decisions are very rarely based, I would think, on what I want. The real emotive power driving mothers' anger at the cost of childcare is grief at the loss of being with their children. Economic necessity means that most mothers have to go to paid work to plug the income gap. But insult is added to injury, in that most of their working wage goes to pay childcare, paying somebody else to use their precious privileges, your first words, the first steps, the infectious laughs, the awesome questions, the awe of the world. And I'd just like to read a couple of things that people have written to me saying. So I'm just going to give you 3 different extracts. So now I'm having to try and settle my 18-month-old into a nursery after it was always being with us at home together, and it's really hard and having a huge impact on me mentally. She's due to be going 3 days a week, and everyone keeps telling me she'll be fine, she'll get used to it. But how many times can I hand over my crying child and walk away? My little boy is 13 months and has an undiagnosed genetic syndrome and is disabled. I've no choice but to return to work full-time because we can't afford a roof over our heads otherwise. He's in nursery 3 days a week, but he desperately needs me more, and I desperately need to be with him more. I'm a mum that wants to stay at home to look after my baby girl, but have no choice but to go back to work full-time. I'm a teacher, and it's all very consuming. It's a stressful job without a child. I'll be left frazzled and feeling like I have to be a rubbish teacher or a rubbish mum. I just want to be a great mum. I don't really want to put my baby girl in a nursery 5 days a week to be brought up by strangers. I don't want to only see my daughter a couple of hours. It makes me really depressed and angry that I have no choice, especially with our mortgage going up by so much in June. I'm just devastated. So at the moment, there's about a quarter of mothers who are currently at home with their children. Some will be on universal credit, some will be rich enough to afford to be home, some will be struggling, living a kind of ideal life as they see it. But the majority of mothers are now in paid work. It's about 75%. According to the latest Department of Education survey, 2022 to 23, they've interviewed parents thinking what are their attitudes to childcare. So under half of those at home would prefer to work if they could afford good quality childcare. But the majority of mothers, the 75% at work, of those who are working, 37% that if they could afford to give up work, they would prefer to stay home to look after their children. And about 67%, more than 2/3, strongly agreed with the question, if I could afford it, I would work fewer hours so I could spend more time looking after my children. So I think the majority of people think that in an ideal world, one parent would be able to be at home. But only about 10% can afford that now. Or can afford a lifestyle that basically our grandparents took for granted. And policy and governments have been instrumental in taking away that choice. They've undermined the family unit. They've undermined the ability of the family to take care of itself. We've penalised families with taxation. We've made this choice almost impossible. And subsidising and care is only subsidised where you outsource it. So the so-called government family-friendly policies starts from the wrong emotional ground. It's not about care, and it's hardly ever about the needs of the children. If you look at the last budget in March 23 by Jeremy Hunt, he talked about labour shortages and what is good for the economy. It all came down under the title of education. He announced the expansion of the 30 hours from 9 months to school age. He said it's good for families, but even better for the economy. And he wanted to expand the supply of workers to counter wage inflation. Basically, he wants to get mothers into work to keep wages down so there's more competition. It's not about, just a couple of minutes, sorry. So it's not really about education. And I would say that babies probably don't need education at 9 months. They need love and nurture and connection. The policies are ignoring the fact that mothers are working, that they are nurturing and forming the next generation, and it devalues the work that is being done. So just to conclude, really, if we believe that raising children was important work and it's not a burden, if we believe that those who did that work were valuable and were doing a valuable service to society, I think the approach to childcare would be very different. I think the policies that the government put forward would be very different.
Hi. So this is definitely a very appropriate topic for me today. I've got my breast pump in my bag along with me. So as well as being a journalist, I'm a mother of 2. I'm on maternity leave at the moment. And in a few months, I'm going to need to decide whether I return to work full-time or part-time. I could also quit, but that's not really an option for me, and I'll get to that in a bit. So obviously this means doing a few calculations about the kind of childcare that my husband and I can afford. My eldest is 3 years old now, so we do get some government help with our childcare, which definitely helps. But for example, if I decided I'm going to go back to work full time, I would still pay something for him because it's the limit for childcare for a 3-year-old is they make a term time limit, so you're always paying a bit of a gap to make up the extra. And then putting a baby in full-time childcare is also very expensive. So we've worked out that should I do that, we'd be paying around 50% of our income on childcare, which would end up being more than my annual salary. And we're the lucky ones because we're in a pretty good situation. We're house owners, we pay a mortgage, My husband has a good salary. So you have to wonder how that scenario is panning out for so many other families. So I'm left with the option of going part-time. I actually went part-time after I returned to work the first time after maternity leave, or I could quit. But those two options also have long-term financial ramifications. When you look at things like your pension benefits, career progression, salary increases, you'd be taking a hit. And if you have multiple children, then that's, the preschool age can easily last for several years. And then once a child goes into school, you don't either stop magically needing childcare because the school day ends at 3:30 and your work day does not. So you've still got a gap there that you've got to fill. And beyond the financial cost, I mean, if you could hear some of the logistical juggling that friends of mine have to do when they've got a kid in school, a kid in nursery, they're at work, and trying to get everyone to where they need to be at the right time, it's a bit of a nightmare. So I think it really doesn't need to be this way. And I think we can look to a lot of other countries and how they do childcare to find better solutions. I'm going to talk briefly about France purely because I used to live in France and I have a lot of family there, so I know the system a bit. And the system in France is very much on the side of let's help mothers return to work. So they provide affordable childcare that's readily available. It's good quality childcare as well. It does mean that women often return to work when their baby is only a few months old, which obviously there's a downside to that too. That may not be what you want. But when you do need the childcare, it's there. And the reason it's affordable is because the state subsidises it, but also the employer subsidises it. That means that you're looking at a much smaller percentage of your overall household income. So the OECD Family Database says that a French couple with 2 children in full-time daycare can expect to pay 23% of their income on childcare, which is much more affordable. They also have readily available after-school clubs for as little as €5 a day, and that runs till about 6:30 p.m. Whereas in the UK, a week of after-school club costs around £62, and that's if you can find one. So that's sort of the financial side. But I do think when we're talking about childcare and mothers choosing to work or not, we need to talk about more than that. We need to talk about what mothers want and whether it's possible to have what they want. So in regards to that, I'm going to refer to my favourite parenting author, the economist Emily Oster. Now, she said in her book, her parenting book, Crib Sheet, that when you're making that decision about returning to work, you should consider 3 things. What's best for your child, what effect your choice will have on your budget, and what do you want to do? And her point is that choosing to work just because you want to work or choosing to stay at home with the children because that's what you want should both be possible without receiving lots of judgment. Now, Emily Oster says she chooses to work. Her financial situation is that she doesn't have to, but she chooses to because while she obviously loves her children, she finds that the marginal value of time with her children declines pretty fast, which is something I can definitely relate to. And her way of putting things really helped me realise that what I really wanted and needed for me was to work, and I shouldn't have to feel guilty about that. Furthermore, the studies on the subject of how beneficial it is for a parent to stay at home with a child after the initial maternity leave period don't really give you any conclusive evidence of it being better or worse for the child, in terms of long-term outcomes. So really, it is about choice in the end. It's about what works for the mother, what works for the child, and what works for your whole family. So I think for me, my main issue with the UK childcare system as it is today is that it's so expensive that it really removes that element of choice from women. And my ideal system would really be to have a mix of practices from other countries. I don't think childcare should be free. I think it should be income dependent. I don't expect to pay nothing for childcare. I can afford to pay something. I can't afford to pay my entire salary on it. I think a system like France, where that is exactly what it is, it's income dependent as well as being subsidised, works very well in terms of the financial aspect. But there are other countries too where they offer more flexibility. So, for example, in the Netherlands, when parents have young children, they provide the opportunity for both parents, so fathers as well, to reduce their working week to 4 days a week. And you can do that for a really long period of time. And a lot of parents will do that until their kids are around 7 or 8. And what's nice with that system too is that it also, it brings in the father. Parenting, sure, is not just a mother's issue. So anyway, my final point is I would really love to be able to return to work without any guilt, and to be able to afford it. And I would also like mothers who would like to stay at home and look after their children to be able to do that too without judgment.
Yeah. So my argument is quite different from the ones we've heard before, which I think is good because the discussion over the consequences, the priorities and the benefits of childcare are far from homogenous. They range massively, not only in the opinion, but who they should be focused on the mother, the child, or society as a whole. My arguments address the benefit of childcare to society throughout these multiple dimensions in raising the equality and the autonomy of women on multiple levels. My focus, both in the discussion and more broadly, rests on the importance of giving women equal opportunities in work and also raising the value of care, specifically childcare, within the community. The inequality in the gender division of care prevails both in the home and throughout the workforce, as in 2019, 98% of the childcare workforce remained female. Therefore, while there should be a focus on increasing the accessibility of childcare for women in all sectors, there's also a need to reaffirm the cultural value of childcare and improve the conditions for those who are working in the industry, as this reaffirms the equality of women in the work they do, as well as giving them more choice. Women working in childcare have suffered greatly at the hands of childcare policy, especially in the last few years, as the childcare sector has been underfunded by over 600 million from 2019 to 2020, and local authorities have subsequently seen a reduction in provision by around 40%. This underfunding has caused increasing workforce shortages, and by cutting corners, the government has put higher stress and constraints on an already stretched workforce. Just briefly to mention, the budget in March this year, the opposite of aiding what we were talking about in the crisis of childcare. As instead of providing proper changes in the funding and the provision, it increased the number of children to each workers, known as the childcare ratio. This has been viewed by the childcare providers as a shameful decision, as it reduces the number of time each worker spends with each child. And this is not only burdening provision, but also reducing the quality and the satisfaction of care for mothers, providers, and later on possibly children, which is putting a further strain on the decision for mothers going back to work. Furthermore, this policy highlights a continuation of gendered inequality in the value of labour, as despite increasing workloads, the pay for childcare workers remains around only slightly above minimum wage, which is especially bad for those between the age of 18 and 21. And I think this is a shameful rate, honestly. If we want to wish to inspire greater equity in society, we need to increase the value of care and the family to start appreciate the workforce who is providing it. Childcare policy is essential for a more balanced society, a society that looks for gender equality, which is not only important in giving women the structural ability to work, to be able to define themselves outside the home and to shape the public culture of society, but it is also really important to reaffirm the value of care as an industry, as it is still seen as a gendered activity, and therefore it needs to be seen as equally valuable to other industries. My other main point is reflecting on my experience as a university student, as I want to address the importance of the provision of childcare to the autonomy of women alongside the value of the family. As being surrounded by girls around the age of 18 to 24, who are all driven to achieve a career outside the home, it is evident that these two goals are not seen as mutually exclusive, but most of the time they want to be achieved together. It is inconceivable to most girls at university that they won't be employed throughout their lives. And as it's been addressed, it's no longer really economically viable for most households, now require 2 salaries to survive. But furthermore, one of the importance of the university is showing that women are being more driven to education than many of their male counterparts. Recent research in America and the UK have demonstrated that girls in education are consistently putting in more effort and achieving higher grades than boys. As in America, 46% of women completed their university education compared to only 36% of men. And in the UK, young women are 36% more likely to apply to university than men. This growing dedication to education means that it's increasingly unlikely that young girls are going to want to give up their place in work for a family, and I don't think we should be arguing here that they should. The effort put in throughout girls' younger years should be rewarded by their autonomy and the ability to determine their own path and identity. However, this does not mean that all women in work wish to leave the family behind. As with many girls today growing up surrounded by working mothers, it's often the case that they want to try and achieve both. This, I argue, is valuable to both working mothers themselves and their families, as there is some research showing that having a career has a positive impact on daughters, as it reduces the conflicts of identity over work growing up. The benefits, I would suggest, is that being seen now with more and more girls going into higher education. This shows that the ability for mothers to work is therefore vital, not only for gender equality today, but to continue the progress forward rather than back. It is important for mothers to have a sense of identity outside of their role, to continue to empower themselves and inspire their children, which I argue is a great benefit to society. Therefore, young women should not be condemned for wanting to work. Instead, there needs to be a focus on being able to have and to balance both. We can't simply enforce the importance of the family on young couples who are being driven to dedicate so much of their lives on education. So instead, we need to focus on readdressing the structure of childcare to allow families to have both. Thank you.
I would say, I've had 3 children, and the last one 17 years ago. And I think what's interesting is when I went straight back to work because I had the highest salary, but we went back to work 6 months after the birth. And what's happened today is pretty much everybody at my work now, they're off for a year. So it's interesting that we've got a crisis, but we've got people taking longer than they ever did to be at home with they don't go back until the baby's a year. So how do we marry that in terms of this issue? Anyone like to speak? Gentleman over there.
Thanks very much. It's just a question in relation to what's changed over a longer time frame, because and also about the ratio of child carers, because my mum was a housewife her whole life, and we're very, very proud of it. And she wasn't unusual. In the growing up in the 70s, more and more women were moving into it, but she wasn't unusual in doing that. And yet now, listening to Naomi's story, it's incredible. You say your husband's got a decent wage, you've probably got a decent wage, and yet it's taking over 50% of your income. I mean, it's hard to comprehend that somehow society's not able to bring up its children, and yet we must be spending an enormous amount of money on it. But then, as Emma's argued, the people in the sector are underpaid. So it's very, very confusing how we got here and what the real problems are.
Yeah. Lady over here.
Thank you very much.
Yes, on.
My name is Vanda Nagy, and I am a law student from Hungary. And thank you for the opportunity for taking part in this festival. And my question would be that first, I have studied at university that so those children who are raised up on a way that they cannot connect any person, neither parents and so any person, any adult, emotionally, then those so the 90% of those children will become criminals, more and psychologically damaged more often.
What if they're looked after, childcare?
Yes,
if their parents are
those who are who couldn't connect in the first 3 years of their childhood. And my question would be for all of you, actually, that can you tell any kind of research or any data about that? Is there any psychological effect if a child is raised by someone in the childcare, so not by their parents, or if she or he is raised by his or her parents, biological parents? Thank you.
Gentleman down the back, and then we'll go back to the lady.
Thanks very much. It's been really interesting listening to you guys sort of going along, because each time someone's spoken, I can kind of resonate with what you're saying. I've got a 3.5-year-old at home. I was in a position of responsibility at work. I stepped down because I was like, I'm a dad before I'm a head of department. And I would say I was a very hands-on dad, and I think it's really important that I am. But I've been to lots of various parents groups where all the flyers I've got there's mums of different ethnicities, different abilities. There's never a dad on the flyer. I turn up, I'm the only dad there. I get the so your dad, is it daddy daycare? My favourite is so your mum today. I get when people said, you first time dad, I get books where it's how to be a dad. It's either a football match or it's how to it's set out like I'm some sort of soldier going to invade a country, and it's all and it's all very much with dads it's very much dumbed down to this the very much secondary role. And it kind of ties in with what Emma was saying about sort of like how childcare affects women's rights. Well, what can be done so it's less of a barrier for dads coming into who do want to be more hands-on, that you don't step into these environments where you're kind of standing there going, nobody's going to talk to me until they realise I'm not some sort of weirdo. Even though I've got my daughter with me, it tends to be a very female-dominated environment. What you kind of touched on, sort of the sort of like for fathers also having a right to a day off. I think it was in Holland, in the Netherlands. What would you suggest? What could be done as society more broadly, where as women are coming out of sort of like the house into the work environment, which is excellent. What can be done for men who want to sort of expand their role within the caring environment and the home? Because at the moment it feels very preclusive.
Thank you.
I would say.
The lady just in front, and then the lady next to just this lady here who you gave the lady here.
Thank you so much. Yeah, just a reflection. That was Emma, the last speech, and you were thinking about how childcare as an industry is devalued, which I think is true. But I wonder if the root problem is that childcare as itself is so undervalued, and our society undervalues maternity as a whole. And we're even framing this discussion a little bit as, it's this annoying thing that stops us and prevents us going from work. And I think I also would want to go back to work. I also love working. But having a child and raising it and raising the next generation to be, leaders of tomorrow is one of the most amazing things that a woman can do. It's a unique thing that's unique to us. And I think that feminine strength has been really undersold in our society. And so I wonder if there are things that the government can do to revalue that. Would that be more helpful to us if, for example, if you chose to stay at home for an extra few years, if you got some tax cuts or different kind of ways to incentivize that and say to society, this is really valuable work that women are able to do in a unique capacity, and we should celebrate that rather than see it as only a barrier to success.
Thank you. Taking this gentleman, then I'm taking the lady there in the pink, just that side of you. Yep.
Yeah, I have 3 grandchildren, 2 in Australia and 1 over here. And my daughter over here has just put her little boy, who's 1 yesterday, into daycare 5 days a week from 8 to 6. and she's mortified. But she lives with her husband, they live in a house, they've got, they have a good life there, but they need to do that. And that breaks her heart and my heart. So, but the same thing is in Australia. The two in Australia, exactly the same thing. So it's not just a local problem. But there's a paradox, and I'd like to, you haven't mentioned it yet. I think somebody mentioned a little bit over here. I'm of the age where it's like, I'm wonderful to be a grandparent. In the old days, people tended to stay locally. The old idea about anywheres and somewheres. And because 50% of people now go to uni, they don't go back home. So in the old days, a lot of childcare would be done by grandparents, aunts and uncles there. And that was great. But we have people whose children haven't moved away, and they're basically providing free full-time childcare and really resent it because they're at the age now where, wealthy pensioners, they want to be going out doing lots of things there, but they're stuck doing free childcare. So it's a bit of a paradox, and I don't quite know how to resolve it there. But it's something new. As I say, when I was a kid, mums tended not to go to work because that's what mums didn't do. My mother actually did work, and she always felt she was pleased she did, but she was slightly looked upon at the school gate and sneered at. She just chose to work rather than, it wasn't a financial thing. She chose to do it, and I respect her. But she always felt she was slightly sneered at by the other mums. There's a working mother. Anyway, sorry.
I met some of them.
Thank you. And thank you for the contributions from the panel. I really appreciated the emphasis that was put on seeing this as a family decision and thinking about what's best in the best interests of the family. Because I think too often this gets pitched as being kind of the interests of the child versus the interests of the woman. And I do think that's not generally how people do make these decisions. And I think when we start seeing it as being in the best interests of the family, then it seems to me that actually kind of earning a living is not opposed to the best interests of your child and your family. It's actually a really important thing to keep a roof over their head, and it can be an act of love towards your family that you're going out there and actually contributing financially. But I think also when you see this in relation to the family, without wanting to kind of contradict the focus of this session, you also realise that the childcare stage is a very, very short part of your child's lives when you're looking back when they're kind of in their 20s or 17. The few years that we really focus upon is kind of a blink of an eye, I hate to say. And actually thinking of it in terms of the family, then going out to work, being a good person, being an inspiring person, being someone your children can look up to, being someone who kind of leads a good life that helps lead and direct your children in a kind of morally good way, I think is a very, very important thing. And that kind of comes more in the round of thinking about families rather than pitching one interest against another.
Right, thank you. Do you want to come, Emma, would you like to come in first? Just quickly, because I do want to go back out.
Yeah, so I just kind of wanted to pick up on it'll relate to Joe's point and the point about the criminality of children who don't have an adult emotional connection. I think my point I was trying to make is that I think that childcare, like people that go into childcare often really, really care about the children they're working with. And I think that really is emphasised. That's why I'm saying it's undervalued as an industry, because the work that goes in to look after those children, it's a job like everyone else has a job, but they've chosen that job and often they care about it. So it's not, okay, you might not know them personally, but often, like, okay, I don't know from my experience, but like from what I've been told, like you get to know the people that are working with your children. So it's like it becomes kind of a relationship to raise that child together. It's not just your handing over abdication of responsibility. And also I think that the reason, I don't know any research, I'm going to be honest, but a lot of my friends, as I had mentioned in my speech, a lot of people my age, the people I grew up with when I was younger and my friends now have all been raised by working mothers. My mum worked, she worked a lot. I was in childcare, I had after school care, I had babysitting, but I wouldn't say that damaged me. That's what I said about inspired. Like, I've been inspired by that. And my mum was there just because she wasn't there all the time. She was like, and I think that's the important thing, that if you are driven to work and you've got a passion, you're interested in it, that doesn't need to become before or after the family. I don't think they're synonymous in that way, but I do think that it's not damaging to the child to be able to balance both, yeah.
Would you like to?
Yeah, gosh, there's so many points. I probably can't remember them all.
In terms of damage, I think that's probably the really extreme end of things. And I think when people reference that, they may be talking about things like Romanian orphanages, where you had a lot of babies sort of left neglected. So I think that's there is a lot of research on attachment in the first couple of years of a baby's life in terms of the babies are born neurologically fragile. And I think there is just have a look at attachment theory. But I think most families have the care of their child at heart. And I think what's really important is continuity and consistency of care. It doesn't have to be the mother at all. Most mothers want to do it. I think, as someone was saying, 2 years goes like in a blink of an eye, but it's a wonderful period as well. But it is, I'm losing my thread, there's so many things. Fathers at home, fantastic. Wonderful. I think it should be a family choice. I think the reason we've kept the name mother, I think, is a lot of mothers felt that, fathers at home are seen as progressive, whereas if you stay at home as a mother, it's seen as backwards. But we want to be, this is a really radical, this is a choice that we want to make. It's a really good choice. So that's why we've kept the name mother in our title. Sorry. Yeah, sorry.
I think, first of all, I just wanted to come back on, I think someone over here talking about children being raised in childcare. If your child is in childcare, the parent is still raising the child. I raise my children, but they will have to go into childcare when I work. But I and my husband are raising them. And whether you work or not, you are a full-time parent. And I think every parent would agree with that. I definitely agree with we need to be sort of bringing fathers into the equation more as well. I'm lucky my husband's also a very hands-on father. I know he would love the possibility of more time with the children, which is why I wasn't just talking about financial things in terms of the family. I was talking about also, can we look at more flexible options which are possible in other countries? So I mentioned Holland, but also in Germany and I think Slovakia too. You can, I don't know if it's fathers too, the mother can take 2 years off of work and keeping her job, and you can sort of spread your maternity pay or statutory pay or whatever it is over those years in a way that works for your family. And again, the childcare in those countries is better subsidised, so it is a viable option. So I think flexibility is also really important.
Great. Lady here, anyone's got a mic? Just that. And then the gentleman in the blue shirt.
Hello, I'm a grandmother, so I'm one of the older ones. And I've seen lots of changes. But if you really look back in history, women and mothering and family is very political. And I'm sure we all agree. And if you look after each World War, women were brought into the factories, then they were taken out of it each time. I don't need to give a history lesson. And this moment of time, it seems evident that they want women back in the workforce for whatever reason. However, as we've all said, and it's clearly evident that it's not affordable, it's very difficult and it's very expensive, and there aren't the grandmothers around. What I'd like to pose, and I don't think we'll be able to get to the root of it, is why does this country not value, and it has been alluded to one of the people in the audience already, why don't we in this country value our childcare? Where clearly France, equivalent sort of capitalist European society, the Netherlands and other places, we can quote, can do it and financially do it. What is the stop? What is it all about? I don't know. I'd like to know.
Thank you. Gentleman with the blue shirt.
Right. It's just a thought I just had, a kind of question, I guess. So recently there's been obviously a massive move towards people working at home online. Lots of people doing that now. I was wondering if there's any thoughts on how that could potentially affect the ability to be a caregiver at home and also work at the same time.
Thank you. Do you have that?
There's been a lot of talk about choice on the panel, which I'm a big fan of. But from a policy point of view, I think there's also a reality that, actually, generations of people, when they've had children, their choices are limited, and from a policy point of view, what you should be looking at is what works for the whole of society. And I think the problem with British policy, particularly, you take Naomi's points on this, is it's always been very contradictory and often quite dishonest. That a lot of the kind of so-called family-friendly policies put in the language of choice and choose this or these options, trying to fulfil lots of objectives at the same time, which I think places an enormous burden actually on young people starting out and trying to kind of negotiate that question of whether to have children. So I suppose my question to the panel is, with the kind of sudden discovery of the demographic crisis, it has brought to the fore a bit more that question of, well, actually, how do we as a society say that we value having children as a society? And maybe it's time to recognise that the family and childcare aren't in conflict, as they've always been presented in British policy, but actually you do need both, because as a society, we want to have children and welcome them into our world collectively. And then individuals can they'll have to navigate around it in whatever way is possible, but obviously it could be made a lot more straightforward and a lot less emotional as a policy initiative.
Thank you. Now I want to get 3 people in and go back to the panel. I'm sorry, this lady in the green, and this gentleman there. So if you could all be quite brief. Thank you.
Okay. I just wanted to challenge the idea that it's either stay at home with your children or return to work as a woman. I've had 3 children, and when they were born, I was working as a therapist, and I found that very difficult to make it work on a practical level, going back to work. But I also felt, because I was working with attachments and I was very informed about the importance of those first 4 years, I felt it was important to spend as much time with my children as possible. So I didn't go back to my work as a therapist, but because I was at home, I started writing. And since my first child was born 15 years ago, I've written 4 non-fiction books and become a freelance journalist. I do all that from home. So I just wanted to add that it's not, you make one choice and then forevermore you're going to be at home in an apron, thinking empty thoughts about nothing, because you can actually pivot as a mum into something that works for you and works for your kids. And I found it to be really fulfilling. Thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to add to the point of dads. Dads are amazing and really, really important. However, my mum was a full-time career woman, and I was in daycare all day, every day from a very early age, picked up by my dad. And I spent all day yearning for my mum to come home, and yearning and yearning and yearning. And she would eventually get home just before I was so exhausted I couldn't keep my eyes open anymore, and kiss me goodnight. And that was my whole childhood. And I would say that my sister and I have grown up in a state of deprivation because our mother wasn't around, and abandonment really as well, because children have a need to be with, their mother, to attach to the mother. Dads are amazing as well, but the mother is critical.
Thank you. Gentleman there, and then I'm going back to the panel for brief comments. Yes, that gentleman, thank you.
I think my question picks up quite a lot on points both from the panel and there about choice, which is, surely if we're going to and I don't think it's a bad idea at all, to provide support for mothers and fathers, whether through the tax system or through benefits, surely what we need is flexibility of care. So you, instead of trying to directly subsidise something called childcare, subsidise people looking after their children, then people who stay at home all the time, people who work 9 to 5 or 9 to 7 and put their kids in childcare, both can use it. And similarly, if you're going to provide extra time, it would seem to me to make sense to let people shuffle it so that couples can, the couple who's staying, if one couple wants to stay home, my family, for my younger brother, it was actually my father who did this, can look after a few days, rather than situations where people have jobs that have to be for 5 days. Realistically, it's not going to work going down to 4 days. But so it seems to me that both, whether we're providing extra time or extra money, the thing to do is flexibility, so people can use the kind of care that works for them and their children best.
Great, thank you. Right, we've got 30 seconds really, so I'll start with you, Anne.
I think families know their children best, and they know their own situation. So I think it should be within the family, which makes a choice. So what Mothers at Home Matter campaign for is a level economic playing field for tax system to support the family, for tax reduction in taxes to be targeted at families, and for a childcare system which is like a voucher system. So you can choose whether you stay at home, whether you give it to a grandparent, whether you give it to a childminder or an external nursery.
Thank you.
I think there was a point about, people working from home a lot more since COVID happened. And I remember at the time when we were all told to work from home that there was a lot of women saying, oh, we've actually been asking about this for a long time. And suddenly now that it's affecting the men, it's become possible. And I think it sort of really rings true. And whilst we talk childcare is, of course, a family decision, this really always and still affects the women the most. And I think we need a more flexible system so that women can have the same choices as men, because that's not possible right now. And just in terms of, the sort of the emotional side and, how you feel about being a mum. And, I love being a mum, but I would go insane if I couldn't also go to the office and speak to adults. There's a sense of self that comes with working as well. It's a personal thing, though, and everyone has to work out for themselves what is the right way for them. And for that to happen, we need a flexible system.
So bringing all the points together, like with your question about how it seems almost hard to comprehend that society cannot pay to care for its children, it is true that it's become almost a lot more complicated. But I think that the argument I was making with kind of addressing the problem with the lack of value of care is that it is much more complicated now, because it's not the simple expectation that mothers just look after their children. Because the arguments that there's reasons why we fought for women to have equal pay. There's reasons why we fought for the shared parental leave policy, because then it becomes a possibility for society and for families themselves to choose how they raise their children and how they balance that. And so the argument that is just that we need to keep pushing with those policies to now enable people to have the discussions and make the choice.
Thank you. Thank the speakers. Thank you. Thank you. Engage.